Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Gavin Thomas. I'm a colleague from TeamPolice. TeamPolice are working closely with Police Sport UK to help promote, enhance the opportunities for sport in policing. This is our second webinar of our series. It's a series which we've entitled Work, Live Well. And after the last webinar, we felt this one would be really good to focus on the police covenant. More importantly, how the police covenant can increase the opportunity for sport in policing. As we know, it's going through legislation now and has already been through consultation. So I think it'd be really useful and interesting to see where this might fit in terms of enhancing and helping to promote access to sport for everybody in policing, those retired, serving, and families and police staff. So to help us with that, we're very fortunate to have two Chief Constables, Lee Freeman, Chief Constable of Humberside, and Andy Rhodes, Chief Constable of Lancashire, who's also the National Wellbeing Lead, and also for Oscar Kilo 2 for the police service. And also, I'm very pleased to introduce Ian Williams, again, an ex-police officer, but now currently working for Motorola. And we're very grateful for Motorola, Motorola Solutions, who are our key sponsor to support this webinar. And I'll say it later, but we can't do this without support of businesses such as Motorola Solutions, working together with us and colleagues in the police service to raise the profile of sport. So what I'd like to do is introduce Ian and ask Ian if you'd like to say a few words for 5 minutes in terms of Motorola, please.
Thank you, Gavin, and good afternoon, everybody. And yeah, as you've said, I'm currently a consultant for Motorola. I retired last year, about 18 months ago, having served 32 years. So this is something that's certainly close to my heart, regardless of being involved as a sponsor. But very pleased that Motorola is sponsoring TeamPolice. We have a history of sponsoring police sport, in particular cricket and rugby, but really looking forward to getting involved on a number of levels in a number of sports at a number of events, really. It's really important to us that there's a strong well-being and welfare theme with this. It's something that we think is really, really important. At Motorola, we've always been close to the end user, and I know that from being on the other side of the fence and working closely with Motorola from that side. But it's really important that we are close to the end user and we understand all of the welfare concerns, but also understand the outcomes that forces and particularly end users are trying to, the outcomes that they actually want to achieve from our solutions. And it's important that we make those solutions intuitive. So, I mean, just to give you an example of that sort of thing, which I can, again, talk about from both sides of the fence, really. When I was the mobile lead in a large force, whilst we concentrated on delivering strategic outcomes that were important to those forces and the chief constables and the command teams and the PCCs, it was equally important to consider the welfare of users that are actually going to use those solutions, and those people who they'll always be at the forefront of our thinking. And I suppose to give you an example of that, when I was talking to super users of our mobile application Pronto, probably I would suggest 90% of the people who told me that what was important to them was the ability to pretty much go home on time. Those super users were the ones that were actually hanging the jacket up at the end of a shift and going out of the door on time, where some of the lesser users were probably spending another hour or 2 hours topping and tailing some of the things that they weren't able to do in the field. So that's continued really with what, you know, we all know what we've seen with COVID in the last 12 months really. But some of the things that we've been able to do during that period is support forces and particularly support end users. For example, we've been able to deliver a ticketing application within several days and go live with that in a number of forces, which has been able to mitigate that risk of face-to-face contact. We've also been able to do a similar thing with remote statement taking to mitigate the risk for those frontline users, but also for victims and members of the public, to keep them engaged in a process that they might actually think isn't for them with the risks involved. So we've been really happy to be able to help with those things and actually do it because it needed to be done, rather than do it because there was any profit in it. It's also worth mentioning that we have a charitable foundation, and there's a really strong theme of well-being in there. We made $10 million worth of grants last year alone, and it tends to be building year on year. And there's a really strong theme for frontline responders and well-being in that, where organisations can make applications to get grants of up to $50,000 for the sort of outcomes that you're trying to achieve with TeamPolice, really. So it's really important to mention that, I think, that support there is available from us. And I suppose, just finishing on a personal note, being a retiree now, it's really pleasing to see in the covenant that actually retirees are feature there just as volunteers do, because one of the themes that came out of the consultation was that some of the issues that you build up during your police career don't end on retirement. We carry this baggage the rest of our lives, and some of us deal with it better than others, and some people need long-term support. So I'm just really pleased that actually that is involved in the covenant, and that consultation, all of those factors have been taken into account, that it's not just about serving officers, which is obviously important, but that help and support really goes right through to the end of your life, really. The lights are just dimming in here now, so I'll finish there, really. But really, we're really pleased to be involved in it for all the reasons that I've said, because it's really important that that health and welfare theme features in everything that we do, and everything that every vendor should think about, really. Because it isn't just about getting the job done, it's about getting the job done and doing it in an environment that it's that it's healthy for people to work in that environment. So very pleased to be involved, and looking forward to the content of the seminar, the webinar. Thank you, Gavin.
Ian, thank you. And delighted that Motorola Solutions are with us, and we look forward to working with you and long-term relationship with TeamPolice. Stay with us, because I'm sure I might try and bring you in later when we have some questions, particularly if they get difficult to put to you. So I'm going to move on now to what I think is the important part of the webinar, and it was the same as our last one, and it's really good. We've got Stuart Parker from West Midlands Police joining us. Stuart, you're really welcome. This is really important to make sure that we make sure we're grounded and understanding why we're doing this, and it is to support everybody in policing. And I'd like to introduce Stuart Parker from West Midlands Police. Stuart, good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, Stuart. Stuart, I just want to start by asking if you could just talk to me a little bit about your journey, where you've been, and what helped you to come through, from your journey, really, please.
Okay. Firstly, I've got 20 years service, near as damn it. I've been serving in the West Midlands. I have done for the whole of my career. For 15 years, I seemed to be fine, or I thought I was. Personal issues and issues at work, stress, etc., etc., took me to a place that I never want to go to again. It's hard to explain, but over a period of years, my mental state and my mood swings, my depression, anxiety, all kicked in, and it actually got to a stage where I was actually taking a statement at work, and I couldn't write any further, and I couldn't speak to the witness, quite an important witness, because my brain just went numb. Oh God, this can't be right. So I went back to the station, spoke to my supervisor, and obviously went to seek help. Before that, my wife in particular was pushing me. She could see there was something wrong, being a pig-headed, stubborn man, I assumed that there wasn't, and that I could just carry on. And to be fair, she probably did me a big favour by telling me that I've got to go to speak to the doctor, which I did. And there's lots of things, as I say, going on in my personal life that took me to that place. But even so, I was hoping I'd never get to what happened to me. So I went to see the doctor, and obviously they diagnosed me with depression and anxiety, but particularly depression, very down. Nothing, even a family holiday, I remember it, we were going away for 2 weeks, even that didn't excite me, pretty much nothing did. So I went to the doctor, and then a friend of mine who is in a different police force told me to go to Flint's House. I don't know whether anyone's aware of, you probably are, the rehabilitation centre.
Yes, great place.
I went there for 2 weeks on a mental health course, residential. I spent obviously those 2 weeks with a different variety of people from the police force, including a chief inspector, an inspector, and a sergeant, I think, out of 10 of us. So it was all different ranks. So we were all suffering the same sort of things, obviously different levels and different things that had sort of made us get to that stage. So I did 2 weeks of that, learned a lot about how to handle what I've got. And that's the best thing I got out of that, I think, was the fact that your depression doesn't go away. I still have days now where I don't feel the best, but I know how to handle it, whereas before I didn't, especially at work. Everything, the slightest little thing was getting to me. Obviously I was an experienced detective at the time. Normal things that I wouldn't think twice about were starting to affect me. But while I was at Flint's House, they promote part of depression and getting out and new wellbeing and trying to rehabilitate yourself is sport, and they really push that. And whilst I was at Flint's House, I exercised every day without fail, 3 times a day, swimming, cycling, and running, which I took up as a new pastime. I'd already played cricket for the West Midlands, and I'd already played football for the West Midlands, but as I was getting older, I'd sort of retired from those and hadn't got that to fall back on. Otherwise I may have, not been where I was. So I took on board what they'd said, and to this day, so that's 3 years ago now, sport is a massive part of my well-being, and to be honest, I couldn't live without it. I think I would quite easily go back to the bad old days if I hadn't got something just to take my mind away from things.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you for being so candid and open of your own personal experience. Tell me, you mentioned about sports. Obviously sports being a good part of your life anyway, but how important was sport in the last 3 years to you?
Oh, massive. I don't think I can. As I say, I was already playing for sport previously through the PS UK, which in itself was great, and that's continued. Obviously, I know that all forces are still participating in that, which is brilliant. And I still play. I'm captain of the force cricket team, so I've still got that to fall back on. I can just about manage that one, even though I'm nearly 50. So, but hopefully someone will come and take over from that mantle. But it's the running and the cycling in particular that have really taken me to a new level with regards to my brain, if you like.
Yeah.
Very, very therapeutic, extremely relaxing. It just gets you away from the hustle and bustle of the stress, if you like. And I got involved in the athletic section at West Midlands, and there must be a common theme here. I now run the athletic section. I'm secretary of that. In particular, the running section, which is the cross country and the athletics around the track.
And how much do you think sport is promoted in the service compared to, because you said 20 years service, so you've probably seen some changes like I did when I was in the service. In your view, how do you think sport is being promoted at the moment within the service? It's
improved dramatically recently. I think I've probably seen it full circle. When I first joined, it was a very important part of the job, especially morale, team sports in particular. In fact, I actually joined the police. One of the reasons I joined, because my dad was a police officer, and obviously he experienced all that as well, was sport. I've been a sport mad kid all my life. And I thought, well, happy days, I can go enjoy and do a job that I want to do. and I can also represent the force in sport. So it was great. I then found over the years it got less and less. Obviously, the restrictions in the job and the nature of the job has made it very difficult to get time off. But I've noticed again in the last few years that seems to be changing, which is great. And long may that continue, because I can speak from personal experience that those kind of things that really help.
And as well as sport, in terms of, because as Ian said, having served, it's that cumulative effect over a period of time of experience things which many people would never experience. And some people can handle and deal with it. Other people, with the cumulative effect of other instances or things happening in their life, it can have an effect on them. What else other than sport do you think is good in respect of helping people out there who are suffering from that in the service, mental health?
Well, I did a little piece to start about talking. Clearly, I was embarrassed at the time for me to say that a man in his 40s could suffer with what I did. Never thought it happened to me. Pig-headed. In fact, I was adamant it wasn't happening to me, but clearly it was. If I can promote anything other than sport, it's to seek help. Don't be embarrassed. The help is there in all. I'm sure it is in every force. Certainly was in my force. I can only say the force of in certain aspects have been very good. The care afterwards. I think sometimes where we might fall down a little bit is that we don't recognise that somebody may be struggling in the first place. And to maybe see the signs of that. I think I can speak from experience with my supervisor, who after the event thought, I thought there was something wrong, but I didn't know how to approach it. So I think talking is a massive part, as I say, especially for men, because we don't like doing it from experience.
I couldn't agree more. And I think there's that expression: it's okay to not be okay, and to say so. In your view, from your personal experience, do you think culturally it's changed? I mean, certainly when I joined, this wasn't even on the narrative, wasn't even on the agenda within the service. But do you think it's changed now culturally within the service at all levels?
Yes, most definitely.
I think it's pretty positive.
Yeah, I mean, every day, well, I say every day, a lot of the days on our notice board, there's things on there. I think there's something on there just last week about well-being and health and where the help is there and who to go and seek, who to see. And that can only be a positive thing. I think a lot of people have suffered in silence in the past, but hopefully that's changing rapidly.
And so you'd certainly advocate people, who are going through this journey like you have, that getting engaged in some form of physical activity, whether it's walking or anything, does help.
Most definitely. I think it's proven, isn't it, scientifically, that certain exercises in particular are good for your mind, and anything you can do, and it doesn't have to be, it's something that makes you happy, something that takes you away from the stresses of everyday life, kids, work, family, all the outside pressures you get. Just to go and have a walk around. We've got a duck pond at Bourneville. Just I regularly go for a little walk around there, and it's amazing. 10 minutes around there, and it just takes you back down to the grounding again. Yeah,
it's a nice part of Birmingham. Tell me, the other thing that I was going to ask you about, again based upon your experience, in terms of facilities for access to sport. Obviously, I know you're a West Midlands officer, but what's your view of that in terms of access to facilities such as I don't know, sporting equipment or gymnasiums and such like? What's that like in your experience?
Well, the West Midlands have got, that's a touchy subject probably at the moment.
Sorry.
The West Midlands have got good facilities, very good in fact. We've got tally-ho for starts with all the access to the football pitches, the rugby pitches and the like there. I mean, the gym, we've got our own gym at Bourneville, which is an amazing gym. Although I use the gym for running purposes, I'm not really what I'd call a muscle junkie, but obviously it is there, and a lot of people do use that, and I've got a lot of friends who are massively into the gym who are missing out at the moment because obviously with COVID to start with, the gyms were shut quite rightly, but the local gyms are open again, and unfortunately for whatever reason our gyms aren't. And I know a lot. I speak from experience. You know, I'd be down there 2 or 3 times a week, and I'm not able to go. Yes, I can go to a public gym, but it's not quite the same. You know, we're a family, aren't we? As you know, and there's nothing more nice really than to go down, use the gym, talk to people you know and like anyway, rather than talk to someone who you don't know, from Adam, excuse a phrase. You know, and feel at home, if you like. And it's in the police station, so you know, you can go before work, after work. You know, you don't have the stresses of making sure you get there on time. You're literally on the station. So hopefully, you know, we can get that sorted and get them to be used again, because again, for me, they're a no-brainer, to use.
I would agree with you. And I just asking you again about, you mentioned you're the chair of the local sports association. So there's most forces have got like a sports and social association. And I remember those heady days when they used to have a bar in the station. Those are gone now. But what more do you think sports and social associations need in terms of support, in terms of enhancing and widening that experience of sport, which has been so important to you in your recovery?
As always has been, probably always will be, the hardest bit is getting the time off to sort of do that.
Okay.
I know PSUK is different, because although not all forces are the same, because our cricket club, we merged with West Mids and West Mercia. West Mids get time off to play sports, as long as it's PSUK. West Mercia don't. They get 1 day, I think, special leave per tournament. Well, I mean, we play 5 league games, so just to get to the latter stages of the competition. So West Mids are at a distinct advantage already. So we're lucky in that respect. But I run the local cross country team for the police, which is a regional event. But because it's not PSUK, there's 10 races. You don't get time off for it. And clearly, you know, with it being a Wednesday afternoon at whatever time it is, unless you're on nights or on rest days, you can't participate because you can't get the time off. So you know, it's difficult on a response team, but there's a lot of teams that probably could get the time off if people would let them go. Although the ask is that if someone like me, for instance, I've been lucky that I've been allowed to go, and you know, I'm thankful for that, because it's made me feel a lot better to push yourself. You know, if you're competitive like I am, and to come back feeling great can only help. And then the next day you go to work, obviously your morale's higher, and personally I think that helps with the next day's work as well.
Well, look, Stuart, I really appreciate you stepping forward and speaking so candidly. You know, I hope that anybody listening to this who feels that they may be going through that similar journey to you've been will do what you have suggested, is go and talk to somebody and seek help. You know, I think we as a service now have moved down a bit more than we have in the past, and it's acceptable now to say, you know, it's okay not to be okay, and to say you need help. So I think there's that message, and obviously the importance of sport in terms of helping one's own mental health in terms of recovery too. So thank you, Stuart. Thanks for stepping forward and being so honest and personal of your story. Thank you. So Stuart, do stay with us. I mean, again, I might have a question for you later in terms of how that conversation goes, but if you really have somebody to contribute, then please put your hand up. Lisa, looking at the poll then, so majority of people have heard of it, who responded. I know we've got more than that online, so those who've been a bit shy and not come forward, you can take part in the poll if you want to, or if we do put another poll out, please try and contribute. It does help. And those who have heard of it but don't know exactly what they are. So, okay, well, hopefully we can be able to address that middle point now. And I'd like to turn the conversation now to the actual police covenant and introduce Andy Rhodes, Chief Constable of Lancashire, and Lee Freeman, Chief Constable of Humberside. Good afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon, Lee.
Afternoon.
Very welcome. I think Stuart's story was again a very powerful vignette of the reason why we are here and the reason why we're doing what we're doing, and particularly for you, Andy, in terms of leading the service and the National Wellbeing Service. Just want to focus on the police covenant for a minute. One of the areas that came out from the frontline review, which I remember when I was on it with the then Minister Nick Hurd, was there was a skepticism of well-being measures and desire to see meaningful action coming out of that. How do you think the police covenant could address that? And I'll ask you to make some more wider comments, but I'm just particularly interested in that point.
Well, I think I think it's important to look at where the covenant come from, Gavin. As you say, the frontline review was a huge piece of work that Nick Hurd's team kicked off, didn't he? With a lot of surveying of frontline staff, what things are bothering you, etc. You've also got the officer and staff safety review that was started as a result of some really tragic events. That's got a massive range of work, everything from taser through to kit through to some areas I own around trauma, recovery support, occupational health standards and things like that. Then you got the uplift, 20,000 extra police officers, you know, and you've got then the National Wellbeing Service, which was a funded programme, but is now wrapped up in the college's grant. So we've got some money there, Gavin, and I think the Covenant tries to capture all those issues that previously we haven't seen being made as a government priority. So it's enshrined in law. Where will it help us? It helps me because it gives credence to the whole agenda about improving the well-being of our staff across a range of issues. So we've got 200,000 people working in England and Wales policing. Huge number of people. The National Wellbeing Service is a couple of million quid. The main money that's spent supporting people's well-being is either the employer, the Chief Constable, or the NHS, or provided by some of the fantastic charities that we've got. If you compare that to countries like Australia, where the government have given tens of millions of Australian dollars for blue light responder wellbeing, it's structured in a very different way. So what we have to do, the Covenant helps me give a real sort of focus to employers that this is important. The Home Secretary is going to report to Parliament annually on this. And at the point we're at now with the Covenant is, well, there's been a high-level statement made after consultation that physical safety, well-being and families are the first things they want to look at. And we're trying to deconstruct that, Gavin, and get views from people about, well, what actually does good look like for families?
Yeah.
What does good look like for retirees? So the Covenant is a big deal for me because it almost enshrines in law this commitment that we need to do more for our people around well-being. As Stuart said, you know, so many people for forever in this job, we've never talked openly about our mental health. So we've never made the links between sport and mental health. And so in austerity, everyone cut police sport, they cut time off. Facilities were disinvested in. And, you know, when it comes to what good looks like, this is why forums like this are important, because people need to have a view, realistically, what it is that we can try to achieve through the Covenant. So it's great leverage, it's great profile. It needs to mean something, Gavin, because that's why we're asking people now, well, what do you think it means to you? What gaps have we got? And I notice, you know, Steve's putting about retirees. You know, my take on that one is that if you look at the States, for example, they have from day one with law enforcement taken an approach that's akin to military veterans.
Yes.
You know, and we don't have that here.
No.
If it wasn't for NARPO, there'd be absolutely nothing when you leave the police. So when we talk about access to facilities, one of the problems you'll come up with straight away is there probably isn't enough facilities to open up to further access. Most facilities are in secure police operating bases, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? So that's why we've got to be really open about what the art of the possible is. But I think what I'm saying to Covenant team, and they're very open to this in the Home Office and staff associations that we're talking to at the moment, is let's take a bit of time, particularly with retirees and families, to say, well, what does good look like? Because for serving staff and officers, Gavin, we are 100% clear on what a good model of care for their wellbeing looks like.
Mm.
Are you with me? We just need to focus on getting the basics right and build it up from there with employers, which we're working with chief constables, and some are further along that journey than others. So that's really important for me, because what you don't want is your operational staff not being able to get in a gym, because there's my police gyms, you've got 8 people in it, you won't be able to swing a cat round.
No.
You get 8 retirees in there and your operational staff can't get in. All of a sudden, you've got a problem, haven't you?
Yes.
So I think there's a bigger piece of work to do to describe actually what a good offer looks like that's within the art of the possible, to be honest, Gavin, because we are really starting from scratch in some of these areas.
Yeah, so
there's some great stuff going on. I mean, my take on it is that with families, that we should work out what a good model for family support looks like. In the States and Canada and Australia, they bring families in on day one. They make all their EAP, all their occupational health stuff available to families as well as the serving officers. Is that we need to work out what that looks like, and then we need to give it to chief constables to apply that locally, because in every police force there are different relationships with charities. There's different occupational health models, and there's different ways of achieving the same outcome within each force. But we've got to have good governance around it, or else, quite frankly, it won't happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think just going back to that opening comment I made around the skepticism bit, there's always my experience in the policing, there's a healthy degree of skepticism. There's always going to be that element that will never be completely happy, but I think seeing tangible change or some key indicators of change are a good way of getting people on board to see, actually, this is serious, the covenant, it can make a difference. Can I just bring Lee in at this point? Lee, can I ask you, in terms of your views of the police covenant, and how the covenant could address those sort of rather sceptic views of those in the service around, they've heard this before, but it's not going to make much difference in terms of access to sport or facilities?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. A tour de force there from Andy, as you'd expect from the National Wellbeing Lead. So I'll try not to repeat some of the stuff that's already been mentioned, because absolutely correct on some of the areas you touched on. My first point is I think we should invite and embrace skepticism. From my personal experience in Humberside, being in charge 3.5 years now, the approach that we took was people probably are justified to be skeptical. It's actions and not words that should be persuading people whether or not the service, and indeed wider government, is serious about making sure this covenant makes a difference. And I'll touch on why I think it will in a second. But skepticism is not anything anybody who intends to do something about something should be afraid of. So I don't mind people being skeptic, because I think that focuses people's minds. The number one responsibility for anybody who's got a leadership role in policing at any level is to take care of their staff. Now, and I'm sure everybody here would agree that there was a moral and ethical reason as to why you would want to do that. Why would you not want to make sure that you're taking care of those people who are around you, your colleagues, your friends? And Stuart even mentioned many people feel you're part of a family, and that doesn't stop at the minute that you retire from the service. And I think it's really positive to hear us recognise that, and the covenant begin to recognise that in its consultation. So I think from that perspective, for those who might not share that moral and ethical stance, and I hope everybody does, but I'm realistic, but there's also a business reason. You cannot deliver a highly effective policing service to protect the public unless everybody who works in your organisation feel valued, listened to, supported, feel that they've got support from the people behind them, and create an organisational culture of which sport and support of workplace activities is part of what you're trying to create. A safe place where members of the policing family come to work and feel they can talk and be themselves. Now, everybody comes to work as a 360 person. You don't divorce what's going on in your personal life, and you are not able psychologically and emotionally to leave that at the door. So it's really important about recognizing that there is evidence in its bucket loads academically to talk about the benefits organisationally, individually, about workplace sport activities, both not just sport, but also exercise alone, whatever you want to create. And gymnasiums is a good part of that. We've introduced gymnasiums back in Humberside, significant investment. It's absolutely paid for itself in terms of efficiencies, discretionary effort, how people feel, sickness levels. So that's the business case for it. If people really don't think necessarily there's a moral and ethical, but actually there is both. I think what the covenant will potentially bring is what Andy's touched on. It's that statutory duty to do more to support the police, and it doesn't stop when you exit the organisation, because your experiences, your trauma, your good, your bad, your friendships, people don't leave the police service and suddenly lose that identity they've created over a number of years. The support afterwards, as Andy's quite rightly articulated, is lacking. And that sits on the NHS at the moment. So again, the business case for doing this is made out. I think what the covenant potentially offers as well around the governance, by bringing it on a statutory footing, is hopefully will bring a degree of consistency and recognise that what I would say in creating an environment where it's actually conducive for people's physical, mental, financial well-being, is by it will give a much more consistent approach across the country, because there is divergence at the minute. And I don't say that in a negative aspect. Different forces have got their different context. If we went to all 43 forces, some have got gyms, some have not. Some have got varying degrees of occupational health. Some have got links to NHS services. Some are responsive, some are reactive, some are proactive. I do think by putting it on a statutory footing, it recognises, back where I started, that the first and most important responsibility that anybody who's got a leadership role in policing has is to take care of their staff. If you don't create an environment that is what I think the covenant is trying to do, or the broader footing, then quite frankly, we cannot be and continue to be an effective police service, and we will continue to lose people. So I guess that's where I am. I'm privileged to get involved in PS UK, because I've been drawing from the bank of police sport for the last 28 years. Similar to what Stuart articulated, I'm too old now and don't play football, and I'm hanging in with the cricket, and age-related cricket as well, over 50s county. I'm probably one of the few ones. I even get to field in the covers at over 50s because I'm only 51. That won't last long. But from the minute I landed at training school and they realised that I played football and cricket, I've been drawing from that bank. And it's absolutely critical to my mental health and the stress that I feel, like everybody else, in work and out of work. And I think if we can really get people to recognise that physical activity and work-based team activities and individual can make the difference that I know it can make, I think, along with the organisational and cultural and management training for our leaders, if we get those three things in place, then policing will be less damaging and more rewarding for those people when they leave, as well as whilst they're in it, and we'll be a better service as a result. So I guess that's where I am as an opener.
I couldn't agree with you more on that, Lee. And I'd add one more thing as well. I think it would also make policing, if it's possible, more attractive as an employer of choice, that actually I'm going to be looked after and there's opportunities for me to do those things as well. And I'm not going to come out, at the end of it, potentially damaged or left on our own. The other reflection I have on it, before we've got a few questions coming up, and I think we got some members of NARPO actually on the webinar itself, so it'd be interesting to see whether we get any questions from NARPO on this. Is when I looked at the covenant a while ago, and I was on the frontline review with the minister at the time, and I for some reason I was surprised that it included retirees, and I then reflected thinking, well, why am I surprised? It's actually the logical thing to do. But it just shows that the fact that I was in that culture, that when you leave the service, that's it. You're sort of cut away. The umbilical cord is taken away, and you're for never ever considered again. And as both you and you've alluded to, it is a policing family, and Stuart has, and I think it's really important going forward that we do recognise that when people do retire, they are still a member of the service, they're still valued and still need looking after. So that's a really good opener for the police covenant. Lisa, we got a few questions, I think. Can we coming through?
Yeah, we have loads of questions coming through here, actually. I think Lee has already answered one of them by texting them, by typing it out. But one of the first questions here is, the narrative has changed for serving officers, but not for those who have retired, many of whom suffer in silence and believe they have no one to turn to and invariably get no support, advice, or assistance from the force they serve with. How can we do something about that?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, can I just jump in on that one, Gavin? Because I think Steve's spot on with that one. I guess, if you look historically at how we used to cope with, let's be clear, folks. We have evidence and research by people at Cambridge University now that this is one of the highest, if not the highest, trauma exposure job profession that you can do. Mm-hmm. Potentially higher than the military because we don't rotate out. And I'll come back to Dave's point there about there's not enough time in the police day to get this stuff done in a minute, because I think that's sometimes a cultural issue with us as well that we've slipped into. So we didn't even know that how many of us were exposed to trauma and the effect that was having on our psychological and therefore physical health. What you've got now is, you've got a generation of people retiring. So you've already got the people Steve talks about are out there who may be struggling, but you've got a generation of people who've been in an environment where people are talking more openly and potentially they're getting more support. Certainly in forces like mine and Lee's, we have got, I'll nail McCullers to mass on this one, we have got top quality psychological support in our forces. I know the work that Lee does in Humberside, because we're working with some of those providers on the national side. This is good stuff. No queues, top quality people. But you're talking about in my force going from 350 psychological referrals a year about 5 years ago, jumping up to 1,050 a year. And there's 6,000 people work here. Now it's settled back down to 650. That is a huge unmet need that is now presenting, because we're saying to people, it's okay to not be okay. Yeah. You've got to then have the services available. As they walk out the door as retired officers, they're stepping off a cliff, a bigger cliff potentially even, than they had done previously. You can imagine an officer with 29 and a half years in, entering trauma counselling, starting to deal with his or her issues, and then all of a sudden, bang, you're out. Go and see the NHS. Or if you're fortunate enough to be part of a charitable setup like the Northwest Benevolent Fund is, you take retirees, and NARPO are a strong presence on there. They can get access to stuff through that for the 5 Northwest Forces. I'm chair of that charity. So what we've got is, I think, quite an acute problem here. And I think it's not just the people who've been retired a while. I agree with Steve, what he says. It's the people who are stepping out of an environment now. Some who, more of them, will not go up to 30, 35 years service. There'll be a lot more mid-service leavers.
Yes.
And so our veteran age profile is going to significantly reduce, and there'll be more people going into it with higher expectations, I think. And so we've got to get our heads around what is it we're going to do here. What are we going to do to meet this need post-retirement? That it is potentially a very expensive problem to try to fix for the employer. My view of it is, if you look at the military, Gavin, how they had, one of the elements of their covenant is around prosthetics. So, prosthetics are a big issue with injuries from people in combat. And how the covenant has helped the military is they have a departmental level group that looks at commissioning of prosthetics for people who've lost limbs in the service of their country, for want of a better word. And They make sure that the science and the technology behind what they get is the best that can be afforded. But it's through the NHS, which all of us pay for. So my argument is that we should be getting into the NHS and looking at our big issue, which is quite often psychological support. What is out there? What can we help and support the NHS to commission specifically for our staff? Not just when in service, but into retirement, as well as employers and charities getting together to see what they can do.
Lee, has that been an experience in Humberside as well? The trauma support, the psychological support, which has been offered in Humberside as well?
Yeah, it is. The increase is similar to Andy's. You know, one aspect is when you start to create an environment where it's okay to talk about this, you need to be prepared to deal with the demand that comes through, and that comes back to the skepticism bit again. If you don't put things in place. I would also comment that, you know, I think when I look at my 28 years now, and I look, for instance, as an example, I was a response officer for 6 or 7 years. And I look at what response officers are dealing with now. Not only do I agree with Andy that the frequency of trauma, both physical and psychological, is accumulative in policing in a way that it isn't in other services. I actually think at the moment, quite frankly, it's unprecedented, the amount of aggression and violence and animosity that our officers and staff, and I include staff deliberately there, and I'm pleased to see the Covenant does encompass policing in its broadest terms, because that's important. But what I do see is I think this is actually going to get much more difficult for the people in policing now than those who are much later on in our service. And I agree, if pension-wise, if we think that some of these individuals are going to be able to deal and cope with what they're facing, I speak to officers, sadly, who were assaulted 3 or 4 times within their first 3 or 4 months serving in the police service in parts of Humberside, and I know that's not unique to us. The longer term impact of that and their ability to actually deal and cope with still coming to work and still believing they're making a difference, I think is going to be really challenging for us as well.
I mean, I didn't ask the question in terms of as a negative, because it's a positive, the fact that facility is available and people are feeling absolutely comfortable to come forward in both your forces. So it's an absolute positive. But it goes back to what Stuart said, you know, opening this up and making it accessible to people to say, actually, I've got something to say, I've got something to talk about, is really, really good, actually. And complete different to my experience when I was in the service at a young age, really. Before we come to the next question, Lisa, I was looking the other day, actually, in a book of old photographs of my old force in Gloucestershire, of, I think it was the police football team of 1922, which consisted of a large number of rather big men with big moustaches and large feet. Obviously, diversity wasn't a key thing in those days. Moustaches seemed to be the uniform thing. But it just emphasised to me how important sport, even in going back to our history, in terms of bringing people together and running with a ball and getting out and for sharing, competing, has helped in that. Do you think that, and again, just I know we probably touched upon it, but just going back to sport and the Covenant, do you think that going forward, the Covenant will bring back that sort of sense of teams and sport, and touching upon what Stuart said, that the service is going to see that this is important and allowing people access to do that? Lee, do you want to start, perhaps think of that?
Yeah, I mean, Andy commented that the initial focus of the Covenant around physical protection, health and well-being and support for families. I think the short answer is yes, I do think it will, because I think any focus on well-being in the workplace, sport and physical activity has such a key role to play. You know, all the studies out there suggest that a program of activity, of exercise, is as effective, if not more effective, in terms of helping people deal with mental health challenges. So, you know, we've heard from Stuart the massive impact that sort of exercise and sport regime brings. It's actually really important, workplace sport, for organisational and individual outcomes as well. It's actually really good for teamwork. It's really good for building trust as well as the individual one. So I think there's a massive opportunity around the police covenant for sport. I think sport has a key role to play moving forward, and I think we need to make sure that we take advantage, Police Sport UK, Team Police, of the opportunity that the police covenant brings, and seize that with both hands.
Thanks, Lee. Andy, anything you want to
Yeah,
say?
and I noticed Dave put a comment in about there's not enough time to use the facilities, and I think this is something we've got to front up, Gavin. You know, as I said before, we all know that we were cut to the bone.
Yeah.
You know, and we're starting to grow again now. I say grow again. We're going to get back to roughly the number we had before we started, aren't we? But my argument is with this one that culturally, you only need to look at how we deal with fatigue. We just accept it as normal. Just like we used to accept being traumatized and mental health problems as normal, and everyone used to go to the pub to try and get over it. Right, it's 2020, and you've got a service that's got an opportunity to grow differently. It needs to create time and space, so there's not this big argument about trying to get a couple of hours off to go and do a cross-country run.
Yeah.
Are you with me? So it's the pressure in the hamster wheel, Gavin, that needs addressing.
Yes.
Because in the workplace, that is the curse of the police service, is that we keep pressing the pedal harder. And I've made this argument at the National Uplift Board. I've made it at big key meetings around the Covenant and when we were on the frontline review. We've got to grow better, so we're in a better place when we started. And part of that is creating the time and space for things like sport, you know, even downtime for people. You look at the fatigue issue, it is off the Richter scale for our frontline staff.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I did a poll at your Supers conference, Gavin, many years ago. Do you remember?
Yeah.
And I said, how many people take stuff to try and help them sleep? 80-odd%.
It was, yeah.
And somebody came up to me and said, if you'd have said non-prescription, it would have been 100%. That's superintendents. When you get to the front line, people are absolutely knackered. Yeah. And so we've got to get our heads around the fact that as a service, we don't do what other professions do, like the military, where we take people out of the operational environment and give them a break and train them and put them back in. Yeah. We do it all on the job. And I personally think that is the biggest cultural problem, because all these things that we want to do are hamstrung by this problem of finding time. I can't get forces to provide line managers to be trained in how to support the staff with mental health, which those line managers want, because they can't release them. Yeah. You're not going to get released for Police Sport UK if there's not some slack in the system like there used to be. And I think that is something that shouldn't be overlooked, because it takes chief constables to address that sort of thing from the top down, because otherwise this hamster wheel just keeps spinning.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just come in support of Andy for that? It's absolutely right that you have to give permissions from the top around the type of organisational culture that you want to create in your force, in Chief Constable's perspectives. Absolutely critical. And you know, if you create an environment where it's almost a dirty word to talk about not having your phone off when you're on your rest days, about taking your annual leave and not trusting your colleagues to cover for you while you're away, feeling that you've still got to be contactable, doing your emails at night, for example. You don't plan when you're on a period of leave to have a clear day so you can get back up to speed. You're not taking lunch breaks. If you don't from the top give permissions to say that you do not require to sell your soul to get on into this organisation, it's actually mandatory that you actually look after each other and you think longer term about your own well-being, then the things that Andy have just described will continue to keep happening. And particularly as we start to face some talk from the current government about a focus on reducing crime and the potential for coming back to a more target-based culture, there is a real risk here that we miss this opportunity
Yeah.
to operate in a very, very different way. And I just reiterate, I make no apologies for repeating myself, that the number one responsibility for anybody who is a leader is to create an environment where your staff feel valued, supported, listened to. You cannot protect the public if you have an organisation where people feel fatigued and driven and a bit like a rat running around a wheel. It doesn't work. So we absolutely, from the top, need to make sure that we do something different over the next 12 or 18 months around this uplift. Otherwise, what Andy has just alluded to will happen.
Thank you, Liam. I couldn't agree more. I'm going to bring Elisa in with another question.
Yeah,
but
I
Go on,
think
Lisa.
leading on from the great answers from Lee and Andy here, I think this question would be a perfect follow-up. And
Okay.
that is it possible the police covenant could be used to assist in gaining uniformity across the UK for time off and facilities for sports?
I mean, I think it's part of what does a good support system look like from the employer? And, you know, you've already, somebody has mentioned that, I think it was Stuart said, well, the force next door does this compared to the force on the other side of the border.
Well, Stuart was saying, the same cricket team, one half of the cricket team can get a day off, the other half can't.
Yeah. So I do think that consistency, you know, and British policing aren't words that normally go hand in hand, apart from when we're doing the serious stuff, which we do brilliantly.
Yeah.
Just to reassure people, the covenant, I'm building the basics up with the Wellbeing service, right? As Lee said, some forces haven't even got a properly functioning occupational health facility. They've got 6 months queues and people are getting the wrong type of counselling. So we've got occupational health standards that are published through the Royal College of Occupational Health that are part and part. That's what I've put into the covenant. You've got to get this standard reached. And I'll tell you now, all of a sudden, I'm getting emails from forces, some of them very big forces saying, Andy, can you come and help me review my occupational health function? Yeah, because those chief constables know that there's a standard been set. We've asked them to self-assess, and we're talking about it dropping into the covenant. It's in the officer and staff safety review. It's important stuff. Yeah, this point about the front line don't believe it, there's no point waffling on about wellbeing and having posters on the back of your bog door if when you suffer from PTSD and you stick your hand up, it takes 6 months to get an appointment and you get a relationship counsellor, which is a story I heard from a force recently. Yeah, just doesn't wash with people. Get the basics right. And one of the basics is occupational health standards, post-incident trauma support, you know, good peer group set up, first line managers who know what they're doing. You mean, so we build it up and up and up, and then other things will flow, such as a change in the attitude towards sport and time off for it. If you force people it down the throats, they're likely to kick back some people. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I do think there's, I think it's a great opportunity, this, folks, to get it all out on the table and be honest about what it is we can achieve, but also be very clear about what our vision for the future might look like. Because us lot, I mean, I'm talking about us lot, I'm talking about me, right? I retire next year. The new people who are coming into policing, as Lee said, they ain't going to stay. They are not going to stay if they're knackered, tired, traumatized, and not getting the support they need on a bit of a break. They are going to they're going to turn over quicker. And most commercial businesses that I sit on some groups with, the big commercial companies, they are into wellbeing because it's about staff turnover and retention, because that's the most expensive cost for them, is people getting fed up and leaving and losing talent. So that is coming for policing. Turnover rates are starting to increase now. You'll see that. And one of the things, as Lee said, that's going to keep them here is, does the boss who runs this place give a monkeys about me? You know, do they care? So it's a massive issue.
Can I just, Stuart, can I just bring you in for a few seconds to what you've heard, your reflections on from what you heard and from your personal experience?
listening to the two chief constables, it's very refreshing to know that, you know, the Covenant will hopefully help us in the future. A lot of that I didn't know, so it's great to hear what's going to happen. I think on the PSUK front, I'm not sure if it's possible, but what I find I don't unusual, or I don't know why it happens, is that PSUK surely is a Police Sport UK, so all forces could have the same agreement that if you're participating in that particular PSUK event, then you all get the same time off. I don't see why that's so difficult. You know, because and we've proven that with the cricket team scenario. You know, the regional stuff I get, sort of, that's more of a local based thing. But if you're playing in police sport, then everyone should get the time off or the opportunity for it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Stuart. Lee, is there anything I'd add to what Andy said on that one? Or?
I think we touched on. I think Stuart opened earlier about talking about police sport and how things go full circle. There was a slight positive difference this time round, and I do agree with that. I think 10 years ago, police sport just disappeared off the face of the earth as austerity kicked in, and we chucked the baby out of the bathwater, and a number of things, and police sport was one of them. The difference this time round is when I joined the service, police sport was a fundamental part of what we all did.
Yeah. But
it was never about outcomes around well-being, physical and mental health. It was just what we did. There's a real opportunity now, because actually there is a direct link being made to the benefits of this. As I said before, there is a moral and ethical reason why you should treat your colleagues this way. And the current generation, I've got a son who's at university. When you listen to the students at universities, or listen to people leaving sixth form now, they are really interested in how ethical organisations are. What they are definitely tapping into, being part of something bigger than themselves that has meaning. And policing has probably one of the strongest narratives there is as an occupation, because policing done well, absolutely transforms people's lives. And if you then can create an organisation and a service where you can demonstrate to prospective people coming in that you also are going to treat them in a way that makes them valued, supported, listened to, and they feel part of having a voice of something bigger, that's a massive opportunity for us, not just recruiting the best people into policing, but as has already been mentioned, keeping them. And if we bring people in and we lose them, then actually from a business perspective, but also actually in terms of just our reputation as an employer, it's going to be shot to pieces. So I think there's an opportunity now, because sport is seen not just as a means to an end, as something enjoyable to do, which perhaps it was when I joined. There's a direct correlation being made here to how effective policing is in the future for the public if we do this properly. And I think that's one that we should shout loud and proud about, in all honesty, because I think it's important.
Thank you, Lee. Lisa, we got another question, please.
Yeah, we do. So there's two questions I'm going to kind of bound together here. They're both from an anonymous attendee. And the first one is, how do forces communicate with retired staff outside of the usual force intranet systems? So internal comms to serving staff is good, but very poor to retired staff in my experience. And then same goes for another anonymous attendee who says, it feels that police sport gives a great opportunity for those who have retired to remain or become involved in sports, thus improving their health and well-being, well into retirement and maintain tangible links with the police service. Yet this seems to be a well-kept secret and is not widely known that even in retirement, you can continue to start or participate in sports. So we're starting to try and get this message across, but how can we do this more effectively and interactively to get the message across? So both linking in together there.
I think it goes back to what you said earlier on, Andy, about trying to focus on retirees and families.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, this isn't unusual to our sector, this debate we're having. There's definitely a sort of conversation in most big organisations that, right, I'm only really responsible for what happens to you when you're coming here to work for me. You know, if you're not in work or you've retired, then that's it. There's no umbilical cord that the employer is responsible for. But as Lee said, and I think most people on this call will recognise that people are starting to understand now, because 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, nobody in policing even used the word wellbeing. We weren't even talking about our mental health. The Fed survey showed a 30% increase in staff saying, I'm confident to talk about my mental health in the workplace. Are you with me? So this conversation's happening, that's good. But I think when it comes to what do we do for families, what do we do for retirees, we need to put our foot on the ball and work out what is out there and that works in other places, like in the States, Canada, or maybe, in other sectors and like the military in this country, and agree something that's achievable that we can start doing now, that's better than nothing, which is basically what we do, and then start building on that. Because I think then what you'll see, and you are seeing it now, you're seeing a lot more people leading police forces who've come through this period of the last 7 or 8 years where they get it and they're passionate about it. And I'm seeing that as well. 8 years ago, Gavin, I had certain chief constables coming up to me and swearing at me, saying, don't take the lid off Pandora's box. Next minute, we're going to have health bars full of tofu and stuff like this in police canteens. You know what I mean? It's like, it's been quite a quick, it doesn't feel quick, but believe you me, I've been at it. I've been at it 7 or 8 years. There's been a lot of progress made.
Yeah, I agree that from my experience and from the association, I do agree with you wholly on that. I tangibly saw the journey change, the attitude, the culture start to change, certainly in the last 6 or 7 years in the service in this subject matter. And going back to exactly what you and Liv said about placing a value on this organisationally, and there's a harder edge business edge to it as well. The fact that
we've developed, and this isn't particularly exciting unless you're in a wellbeing anorak like me. What all these big organisations don't have is a return on investment tool for wellbeing. John Lewis's, BP, the BBC, Serco, they're throwing money at it, but they're not really sure which bit sticks. We've developed an ROI tool for the service as part of our governance and reporting arrangements for it, and it's one of the first that's been actually developed in this area. Now, so when I sit opposite a chief constable with a finance director who's got to make tough choices about what to spend money on, I need that sort of information to hand. I need to be able to say, if you invest, Lee, 300 grand in gyms, you're going to get 500 grand back. In productivity, less absenteeism, better mental health, better morale, better talent retention, all those things. Are you with me? That's where we are at the moment with it. I think we've got, out of 43 forces, we've probably got 15 that are really starting to make some progress. There's another pack that want to do it, but are not really sure what to do, and we've got to help them. And then there's still some who are languishing in the 90s, quite frankly, and need to get a wriggle on, and start doing the job right. I have these conversations with people. Somebody said, I'm spending X on my outsourced occupational health, and I think I'm spending a lot on it. I said, you're not. You're not spending anywhere near enough on it. Yeah. That is why you've got a 6-month queue. Yeah. And so what we're doing on National Wellbeing Service actually is we've realised that we need to almost say, right, okay, we've developed the foundations of what a good model of care looks like for a police force. What we now need to focus our attention to is A, helping people achieve it, and then B, helping the system hold them to account. Because that is the bit, as you know, in British policing, Gavin, that sometimes gets forgotten. The accountability for actually tangible change.
Is it actually landing? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I agree. Lee, anything you want to add to that at all?
I would just support what Andy said, really. Very briefly, 4 years ago, for lots of complex reasons, in the National Police Federation Pay Morale Survey, nearly 99% of police officers in Humberside Police described their morale as very low, and it was 43 out of 43. The recent results last week, for the second year running, Humberside had the lowest level of low force morale in the whole country, was the first out of 43. And I mention that only because at the heart of what is underneath that is organisational culture and creating an environment. And to be really clear, this isn't about what I've done, it isn't what about chief officers have done, because chief officers cannot turn a force round on their own. It absolutely has to be every single person in the organisation being sceptical until they can see that actually the force gives a monkey, which is more polite than I would usually describe it. They need to see they give a monkey. And the cost benefit analysis of that is astounding in terms of your sickness, in terms of discretionary effort. The public, as a result of staff feeling that actually they are valued by the organisation, not only does that have a positive impact on their mental health and their work, the public can see a difference. We've had it in bucket loads in the last 2 or 3 years, the public saying that your officers are just, we see complaints plummet. We went at the highest number of complaints around incivility and rudeness back in 2015, 2016. It's now one of the lowest, because there's no way that police officers turn up at a job working for an organisation that actually they feel does not give a monkeys, and then suddenly turn a switch and go and speak to a victim and become, hi, how can I help you, and show loads of compassion and empathy. With human beings, it doesn't work like that. So, you know, I go back to what I've mentioned before, you know, the business case for investing in this, even if we can't persuade some of our colleagues to hearts and minds stuff, is absolutely made out there. It's just us getting to a position where we can capture that and demonstrate it.
Thank you. Ian, I'm going to bring you in for a couple of seconds here, because you mentioned in your opening address around Motorola Solutions and the business part of, you know, well-being and health and your solutions. What you've heard, any reflection on what you've heard so far?
It's been really, excuse me, it's been really interesting, and there's so many good points being made here. And what I think one of the things that I reflect on from myself, having served, is that unlike Lee, when Lee joined, he talked about having his cricketing abilities recognised and being sort of taken into that fold, and that kept him sane, if you like, through his career. I can't say as I had the same sporting abilities when I joined. So, and I spent about 15 years on response as well, which probably didn't help, because you were chasing calls, and I was working at a police station in London alongside the territorial support group, who had an hour or two downtime to go in the gym. And I think Stuart mentioned the same thing. It's about making some of this sport available to all, not just those that are probably used to accessing it and will do it anyway. I think the vast majority of police staff are probably in that group of people who probably need a little bit of a push. So that's probably the thing that I've reflected on, amongst other things. But I just wanted to add one other thing, and I'd be interested to know what Andy and Lee thought of where Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and Fire Service fit into this, and in terms of perhaps making sure that some of these things happen, and perhaps how we can learn from the fire service and how they keep their staff fit. I don't know whether there's anything thoughts on that.
I mean, first thing with the fire services, Ian, they don't actually. I'm not being critical. We're all police officers. Well, I presume a lot of people. They don't actually deploy a lot, do they? You know, so fitness is obviously a central part of their job, like ours, but they do a lot of it on the job because they sat around waiting for the fire to happen, aren't they? But I think you've hit the nail on the head there, actually. Who's going to come and inspect us about this stuff? We haven't got a CQC. The HMIC are rammed out doing this huge peel inspection that they've created. And my force isn't even going to get inspected again with peel until May 2022. And when they do come to do that, they haven't got the expertise and time to look at things like Occy Health, what you're doing about wellbeing. So this was a conversation we were having earlier this week with some of my team to say, well, who's going to do it? We've raised it at the National Committee, and that's why I'm looking at the National Wellbeing Service providing, we're going to have to reprofile, we do some of our work, so that we can go out and actually help forces check that it's working. Because this works a long way away from where the Chief Constable is quite often. And, you know, redesigning and modernising an occupational health unit is quite a complicated job to do. It's change management effectively. So we do recognise, Ian, that we're going to overpromise and underdeliver if we're not careful. So we need to boil it down to 5 or 6 things we think all forces need to do consistently. They'll be in the covenant anyway. And then we need to go out and work with HMIC. HMIC do ask questions about some of this stuff, but not in the level of detail that's going to really get underneath the bonnet. We need to do some of that, or discuss with the Home Office some sort of CQC type function that would have to be funded that would really, really accelerate the compliance around some of this stuff. So we've even thought about asking CQC, but as we all know, they can't even get around all the care homes, can they? They've got to get around. So all these places are very busy inspecting things. We think we're going to have to do some of this stuff ourselves to get it done.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, have we got any more questions?
Yeah, I think because we're getting towards the end, I think let's bring it back to the police covenant, because I've got more questions, but I think this will be a great one to end on. So how will the police covenant make a real difference to frontline staff and their well-being? And following up from that, one of our participants here says, Linda says, how the covenant will actually help all staff and how will that look like? So bringing it back to really what the covenant can do.
Go on.
Right, I've just done a paper for the covenant group that reviewed basically all these big pieces of work: the frontline review, the officer staff safety review, wellbeing service, and the uplift. And I did that because actually, when you look at the totality of what's going on at the moment, there is tons of stuff that's going to make a difference to frontline staff around their wellbeing. On the basic stuff around kit, training, taser, legislation, increasing sentencing for police assaults, that type of thing will come through the covenant. When you look at the wellbeing side of stuff, occupational health standards, all the mental health support, yada yada, that will improve. The one thing that is not in there, and it cannot be achieved without the organisation itself doing it, is creating the culture that Lee talks about, where things like organisational stresses are challenged and addressed. So most of our staff come to work and they work hard, they experience difficult stuff, and they don't ask for a lot. Bureaucracy, poor leadership, IT that doesn't work, tips them over the edge. An ill health process that's rubbish, quite frankly, tips them over the edge. So those are the things that aren't currently in there that I've said we need to find a way of improving. Otherwise, all the wellbeing agenda will be doing is mitigating people running their organisations badly. It'd be like taking a pill for something that you can avoid. And that's where the work needs to be done, root and branch, top to bottom in an organisation. And it needs to be seen as a strategic issue for the force that's 100% about what they do every day. So I'm flagging that up with the covenant group, but I think people should be reassured that the covenant's it will have some fantastic stuff in there where we have got accountability for some of the basics that should be there. And what it's doing is generating an awareness that there's far more to do. Going about tackling some of those things that we've discussed on here, I think needs all of us to come together and work out, what the art of the possible is, as I said before, because we haven't got a bottomless pit of money for this. You know, people are going to have to spend money on it. You know, the chief I spoke to, spending 400 or 500 grand on occupational health, I said, you're going to have to spend at least $1 million. That's another 600 grand just to fix their occupational health. It's got to come from somewhere. And that's the hard-nosed reality of where we are at the moment. So the Covenant is delivering a lot of tactical stuff that should be getting done, making a difference to people. But the icing on the cake is this continued cultural shift and recognition by chief constables, that they are responsible for creating that culture with the services in there that prevent people escalating and having bad well-being and bad mental health. It's all preventable. It's all preventable. And, you know, why have I got 1,050 people getting counselling out of 6,000? People said to me, oh my God, everybody must be falling over. No, they're not actually. They're sticking their hand up earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and they're getting good services, good treatment. They're coming back to work. I can prove it. So it's money well spent. But so I think it is happening. But of course, for you on the front line working 5 shifts, you want to see, what does this mean to me? And that is the responsibility of each police force to get out there and land it on the front line. And it takes leadership to do that.
Lee, is there any final words remarks you want to say on this?
Just a couple of points. One is Andy's absolutely right. This is shifting it from responsive to the proactive responsibility, which is massively important. I would reiterate that one of the things that, and I think David Fraser-Darling's mentioned in the questions, one of the things I can recall from when police sport was a fundamental part was, if you're not good enough to play PS UK sport, making sure that as an organisation we still create opportunities and activities and space for people to feel the benefits of the exercise and the opportunities that we should be creating for everybody. I can remember as a PC, it's all right for you clearing off on a Wednesday to play football for the force.
Yeah,
but
I remember that as well.
We need to be really, really careful for Police Sport UK that this is about inclusivity and not just about performing at the higher end, because we are talking about connections to well-being here, not necessarily about sporting excellence. And I know nobody is suggesting otherwise, but I just put that down as a bit of a marker because I think history has some lessons for us there. But I would just reiterate again the organisational culture, and finally, the single biggest thing that seems to define people's levels of well-being in our force is the quality of first and second line supervisor and management. What training, what skills, what development and what support do we give to our supervisors, our sergeants and our inspectors and our police staff equivalent in order for them to identify, understand, have difficult conversations and get to know their staff so they can actually do some of this prevention work? That's where the real gains are. Occupational health is vastly important, but actually investment in leadership around first and second line management is also absolutely critical. And I do think that's an area of business that if we need to see some uniformity across the country, that's where there's some real benefits to be had.
Lee, thank you. As I said at the start, I was concerned to say we will be finishing at 5:30. I just feel quite inspired, actually. I came in after I retired from the service to work with colleagues on TeamPolice, and listening particularly to Lee and Andy today, it just makes me even more determined that what we're doing is the right thing, and trying to encourage more sport in policing to help people's health and well-being. I would like to thank everybody on the panel, Lee, Ian, Stuart and Andy, for your time. We've had some fantastic comments come from the participants on this webinar. It's been timely, I think. Andy, I wonder, I've just made a mental note myself, whether this is something the Covenant needs to be revisited at some time in the future as a sort of a where are we now sort of thing. So it might be something which TeamPolice might pick up and do again, maybe next year at some point.
Yeah.
And we can have a chat about that at some point. It just leaves me to thank everybody. but particularly Ian Williams Motor Solutions for making this happen, frankly. Without the support of business and our sponsor and partners, Team Police can't do what we're doing. We can't get us together with police leaders to talk about this important topic. So if there are participants out there who are thinking about this is something which they feel might be a good thing to come behind, we're here. Please make contact, reach out to us, and we'll be very happy to have a conversation with you. I'd just like to remind everybody that our next webinar is on the 23rd of February, which details will be coming out in a short while on that. And also to remind everybody, we're still running our spectacular, and I use that word spectacular well, Advent Challenge. We've got over 600, I think, Elisa, isn't it, on the taking part in this?
Yeah, that's correct. I think over 650 at the moment.
On the challenge. So those of you who are not participating who are on this webinar and feel that something missing in your life, there's still time to sign up and still do the remainder of the days in December on the Advent Challenge. Very grateful to Oscar Kilo, who have sort of linked on with that Advent Challenge as well, and PS, and of course Police Sport UK, our partners too. So it just leaves me to thank everybody. Wish you, especially in these times, stay well, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you all again on the 23rd of February. Thank you.